Hello, I'm Stuart Craner. Welcome to this series of webinars brought to you by the Business Ecosystem Alliance. Our aim with the Alliance is to further knowledge of the ideas behind and best practice of business ecosystems. In this session, we're joined by Greg Bernarda. Greg mentors people and organizations in working collaboratively to invent the future. He believes 21st century leaders lead ecosystems, not just organizations, and they create better outcomes for all involved. Greg is a co-author of Value Proposition Design, bestseller throughout the world, and an alumni of the World Economic Forum. Before we start our conversation with Greg, welcome to all who have joined us and who are going to join us. Please send in any comments, queries, insights, questions, complaints, observations, or whatever you want to communicate with us at any time during the sessions, and I'll be sure to pass them on. Greg, welcome. You're going to begin by showing some slides outlining the shift from business models to ecosystem.
Yeah, thank you, Stuart. Thank you. Hello, everyone. See people from a number of places. So hi, everyone. Yeah, so let me start here. So my inspiration with ecosystem comes from a few different places. One place that has inspired me is a quote that I'm going to pull up in a sec here, if my mouse works. Here you go, Jaron Lanier. I don't know if you know Jaron Lanier, Stuart. He's one of the virtual community pioneers in Silicon Valley. He's also one of the fiercest critiques of tech business models in general. And there's an anecdote that I heard from him in a podcast. And this is what he says. He says, the higher up an executive is at Google and Facebook, the more aggressive they are at limiting screen time for their kids. And this is something that I see in many places, that we kind of have this divide between what we're doing in our professional lives and what we're doing in our private lives, right? So we're kind of busy creating a little monster here, and we're trying to save our kids from it on the other side of it. And to me, this is a reflection of the kind of language and frame that we're working with, the frame of business that has become, I would say, too small for the kind of times that we live in. You know, it's too small if you want to think about reinventing your sector. It's too small if you want to unlock growth for your organization. It's too small if you're trying to tackle some of the issues we have, systemic issues we have in our world. It's really too small for the kind of world we say we aspire to do. So for me, this lens of ecosystem is a really a new possibility, a structure, a lens for a new possibility. That's where I get, inspired. New possibility for business, new possibility for societal change as well. And so this is a kind of it's become a buzzword, ecosystem. It's everywhere. I think it's overtaken business models in Google Trends for a while now. But I'll tell you where my inspiration comes from. I used to work with the World Economic Forum, and of course, the WEF is a place where you try to look at things in a systemic way, right? In a holistic way. So you bring all sorts of people together, look at anything from climate change to the future of private equity, but from a well-rounded view, ideally. And so, I was really inspired actually by just this principle of bringing people together. But at some point I realized, great conversations in the room, but, we're eating very well. We're sleeping in 5-star hotels. If you look outside the window, it looks beautiful, looks like this. It doesn't really feel like the world is going really bad, right? So there isn't really an incentive so much for systemic change, I felt. So I left the WEF and I went to China, and I found myself in a very similar room that looked pretty much the same. We talked about the same kind of issues, but there was this one difference, is that when I looked outside the room, looked outside the window, all I could see is this. This was 2010, 2011, peak pollution, Beijing. And, for me, this is a time when something clicked, because I was always kind of intellectually very interested in systemic change, but I felt, is this real? We're really kind of serious about it. And here I found a context where I felt, here things are going to happen because they have to happen. It's a matter of life and death. And it wasn't just about pollution, it was about food security, it was about unemployment, lifting hundreds of people out of poverty. And so while I was there, I thought, okay, so in this kind of environment, there must be already, seeds of new models happening. So I asked around, and everybody pointed me to this guy, Jack Ma, who is less popular right now in China, but for a long time, he's been a huge inspiration. The people that I was talking to, many sorts of people, felt really inspired and almost, had a sense of an emotion in their in sharing about Jack Ma, because he really, through Alibaba and all of the different businesses, had changed people's lives in China. And I specifically looked at Taobao. So Taobao is the biggest part of Alibaba, the Alibaba business. It's mostly in China still. It's an e-commerce platform. And this was the time, as you mentioned, Stuart, I was involved with the books, Business Model Generation, Value Proposition Design. So I wanted to decode kind of what this innovation was. And sure enough, I found that it was a fantastic story of business model innovation. What you see on the screen are iterations of different business model. You may recognize the business model canvas, and there are just a series of evolution going from a consumer platform to a small business platform to a big business platform. So it's a fantastic story of business model evolution. But I also found things that I couldn't quite place in the business box, right? In the business canvas box, so to speak. Things that Taobao and Jack Ma and the team did. So like building trust in the economy in 2003 wasn't very present in China. Building the infrastructure, digital payments, express logistics, all of that was not existent. And typically you wouldn't, if you're running a business, you kind of lean on these things that exist in the environment to make your business happen. Here they weren't existing. And Taobao thought, well, okay, let's actually build them ourselves, right? So build universities, they integrate all sorts of actors, etc. And so back to kind of our language of value proposition and business model, I thought, okay, so there's different levels at which we can create value here. The first level in our language, maybe some of you recognize the value proposition canvas. So the value proposition canvas is all about saying you need to have a great understanding of your customers, need to understand them very well, and then you need to create a great product or service to match your understanding of what they want, right? So, and that's product market fit. That's difficult enough. It's the holy grail of many startups. But as we know, there is more complexity to the picture. So the next degree of complexity is the business model. And our favorite example that we've shared around the world is Nespresso. So Nespresso did invent a new product, the coffee machine and the pods. But really what made the business succeed is by coming up with a more sophisticated, more complex formula of weaving these different parts of the business model. You see business model canvas here. So between channels and key resources and partners, etc., revenue streams. And that's this formula that actually created success for them. And so that's the second business model, a second level of value creation. And of course, there's this third level, which I discovered in China, which is the ecosystem. Now, the ecosystem, we used to call it the environment, right? So you have a business and you're going into the market and you're checking that your business is ready for the kind of environment that you're in. Economic climate, industry forces, what are competitors doing, what are the needs and demands, what are the key trends out there, etc. But what I noticed is ecosystem leaders, and I'm using here another example with Tesla. Tesla is to me another kind of ecosystem, but also an ecosystem leader. They've innovated at the level of the product. They innovated at the level of the business model, but they also did things outside of the business model canvas in the environment. So they took responsibility for doing things that you would not expect a normal business to do, right? Partnering with competitors, building a massive infrastructure, developing deep tech. Normally you would expect maybe a government to do that. And so they took a much larger responsibility of changing the environment and weaving a different kind of ecosystem together. And, I thought, okay, so if these guys, Jack Ma and Elon Musk, go to a business school exam, and they come in with their idea, and they've asked all of these questions that you're typically asked, to see if your business is viable. Is there a market, technology, infrastructure available? Do people want it? Can they afford it? Is it the right timing? Those are the kind of questions you would be asked. In their case, they would always say no, right? There's no market, but they'll create one. They will invent the technology. They will build the infrastructure. They will actually inspire people to want something that they don't really know they want because it doesn't exist yet. Often people can't even afford what they're putting out there in the market. So maybe they find a third party way to weave into the ecosystem to let them be able to afford it. And they create their own momentum, right? So it's a much bigger sense of responsibility. They fail the business game, you could say, the business school exam, because they're playing a much bigger game. And that bigger game has many different principles of how to play it. So it's a new terrain for innovation. And to me, the metaphor that has come to me to illustrate this kind of move from business to ecosystem in terms of leadership is that a CEO probably looks after their own house, right? And they make a nice house and it's pretty, etc. But an ecosystem leader doesn't have to just look at their house. They have to look at the entire village. So they have to build schools, they have to build roads, they have to build sewage systems, they have to ensure that harmony exists inside the village. And therefore, they don't think like a CEO, but they think a bit more like a mayor that takes the responsibility for the entire village, for the entire city, not just their own house. So I have a few other things that maybe I can share later, Stuart, but I thought I'd share these to get us started.
Yeah, it's good food for thought to get us started, Greg. I think a point I made in conversation with you was about there's not many successful mayors, or not many mayors come to mind as great and successful leaders. But I suppose they are at a local level. Mayors work. Perhaps it's a bigger level at big cities. Mayors don't work.
Yeah. So my response to you that you have a few enlightened leaders in South America, in Bogota and Curitiba are famous cases. But yeah, I think mayors have a different job description. It doesn't mean that they're very good at it, but at least it means that there is a different kind of remit that they're responsible for and that they're supposed to make happen. So that's that's at least the essence of the metaphor here.
And I should thank everyone for joining. You got people from Belgium, Kenya, Switzerland, Sweden, Germany, Greece, America, Australia, Denmark, and Vietnam. I'm really pleased to see Julian joining us from Vietnam. Really appreciate you joining us, and please feel free to ask your questions of Greg. At the start there, Greg, you said the frame of business is too small, and that was an issue looking back. I mean, when you go to companies now, actually they talk about sustainable development goals, and they seem to have embraced a bigger picture. Do you think that's kind of lip service, or do they actually genuinely mean it? Because my suspicion is that their frame of business remains quite small, but they've learned the language of talking bigger.
Yeah, I would share this. I think there is only a small portion of people who are talking about sustainability who are making it operational or linking it basically to the core of what they do, right, of their business. So it's not, it's not social responsibility. It's not a nice thing in a sustainability report, but they're actually changing. They're actually taking this as a cue of saying, actually, we need something different out there. People need something different. The planet needs something different, and we're changing our operation to reflect this. We'll go later into slides. I can share a few thoughts about that. How this purpose is changing in ecosystem leaders. Yeah.
Let's get to a few quick questions as well. Frank Karlberg, who's in Zurich. So Greg's in Zurich as well, so you could probably shout the question to Greg. What are the most important metrics to measure the success of an ecosystem? I mean, I suppose the question, I mean, you showed that brilliant slide with the business school exam. You're kind of challenging the truisms of business. And
yeah,
so in some ways, you're challenging the truism of how do you measure success?
yeah. I think you measure success in societal terms as much as in business terms. Because if you're trying to play at that level, you're trying to raise your game from a business game to a societal game, which you have to do in an ecosystem, because as an ecosystem leader, you will have to create a following, a coalition. Even if you're not the leader yourself, you have to relate to how other stakeholders in the ecosystem are trying to get their value. And no one will follow you if you just have a business strategy, right? You have to have a sense of, I'm doing something that is bigger than myself. So I think one metric is this. And then we'll maybe get a bit more into that later. I actually feel this business of metric is important in one sense, but it's also overdone in another. Because when you're dealing with something as complex as an ecosystem, it's hard to apply. If you apply a linear mindset to it, I think you lose a lot in the process. We can come back to it after if you want with a few illustrations.
Yeah, good. The Dean Miles says, what is the kryptonite of the ecosystem structure process? Slow decision making, legal, scalability? I mean, I suppose what Dean's getting at is that ecosystems bring with them a certain degree of complexity. And with complexity, people associate slowness of decision making.
Yeah. I think it's especially true if you are an established player and you're trying to change your current ecosystem, and therefore you're going to have to convince people to start working in different ways, maybe in more of a co-creation, ways, etc. And not everybody is ready for this. So I do think slowness is an issue, convincing people, aligning stakeholders is an issue. And I think these are issues that if you want to be the ecosystem leader, you have to take responsibility for. So you have to help nudge every actor along, and not just say, hey, it's too hard, it's too slow, we can't do it.
The Robert Benin says he likes the idea of mayor leaders, and he calls them village chief executives.
Yeah, which is love it.
Thank you, Robert. I mean, you work throughout the world, Greg, and you talk to CEOs. How do CEOs react when you talk to them about the move from the business model to an ecosystem perspective? Because in many ways, the idea of a mayor suggests some power, but it's kind of a different approach to leadership, different approach to power, different power dynamics. So are they comfortable with that move?
Yeah, again, I think it depends who the CEO is. I think you have CEOs that are a bit more on the manager side, and there's CEOs that are a bit more on the visionary side. I think the visionary people maybe have a natural tendency of thinking like this, thinking in terms of breaking the rules to reorganize them in a different way and creating value, in a way, inventing something that doesn't exist. So I think these people resonate with the idea a bit more naturally, with the idea that they have to play a bigger game, and already have this mindset that is maybe less about management versus maybe leadership, we could call it.
Yeah, well, that makes sense. Should we move on to the next set of slides?
Sounds good. So this is where we were thinking like a mayor. So and I think I'll hit on a few things that came up in the questions. So the next thing I asked myself is what ecosystem leaders are doing that is different from business leaders. And the first thing is indeed that they have a societal purpose and not just a business mission. And just for the two that I've mentioned so far, if you look at Tesla, so that's quite known, right? So Tesla or Elon Musk wrote a blog post in 2006 that's still available on their website, and he was describing his vision. And the vision wasn't about sports car or electric sports car. It was about moving the whole economy towards a solar electric economy, right? And same thing with Taobao, so Jack Ma, Alibaba, and I've spent actually quite some time with some of the people that were with Jack Ma at the beginning. And they were saying the one metric, operational metric, so the metric against which executives were evaluated wasn't how many subscription packages they would sell, it was how many jobs they would create. So job creation was the number one, was the purpose and number one metric. And of course, it makes sense in the environment of China, the government, lifting people out of poverty, creating jobs, entrepreneurship, etc. But so, and to your point, it's not lip service. I think this is the test of a true ecosystem, is that they're actually going to make you feel that there is a move towards a solar electric economy through the products and services that they deliver. Right? So we have concrete things here: the cars, the solar panels, the battery walls, and in the case of Taobao, many millions of jobs created through entrepreneurship. It's for real. And so the next question I asked myself was, what does an ecosystem actually look like? So everybody's talking about ecosystem, and so I was coming in from this language that we've been working with the Strategizer group. So, a value proposition is a collection of features that tells a story of value creation for customers. A business model is a larger story of value creation and capture. And every time you can, it's made out of a few parts, becomes a thing in itself. And so I asked myself, what does an ecosystem look like? What are the parts? And so I discovered there are actually, for me, there are actually three things. And I'm following the metaphor of the village or the city. And the first thing is, well, there's more than you in the ecosystem. There is a set of economic actors, right? And when I say economic actors, could be anyone who's trying to get value out of the system. So it could be people or organizations, could be business, not-for-profit, government, doesn't matter. Anyone who's trying to, get a sense of value, achieve something in the ecosystem. And the principle, if you will, the leadership principle of a good ecosystem mayor is to not care so much about what the boundaries are right now, but it's to bring the right mix of actors that are aligning towards basically delivering on your societal purpose. And that's why you see in these ecosystems, the boundaries don't matter anymore. They're redrawing the boundaries. Typically, you see different kind of unusual actors being brought into these ecosystems. So in the case of Tesla, battery makers and partnering with Benz and Toyota at the beginning wasn't a traditional business move inside the car industry. Taobao, same thing. They built infrastructure. They collaborated with 70 banks to build Alipay, what became Alipay. Logistics industry. They had to weave many different players together into a coherent whole that would deliver on the vision they had. So that's number one, ecosystem, economic actors. The second element of an ecosystem to me is an infrastructure. An infrastructure typically doesn't exist when you're trying to make a new ecosystem happen because it's not there yet. So you might have beginnings or pieces of infrastructure, but it's not fully there. And what I mean by infrastructure is that it could be a physical infrastructure, so your Tesla charging stations, digital, your payment system, just to refer to these two examples that I've used. Could also be organizational. So this is Cisco. Cisco used to run chill workshops. Chill workshops were basically a gathering of different companies that were interested in a similar theme, say digitalizing, the value chain, for example. And so they would organize the meeting, the selection, the meeting, and the facilitation of an event around what value could be created that way. So that's a temporary organizational infrastructure. There's many examples now of more enduring organizational infrastructure in ecosystem. I'll share one with you a little bit later. And so the principle here is that for the infrastructure, you're trying to build bridges you're trying to stitch a new infrastructure together made of old pieces, but very often you have to build new pieces of infrastructure so that your users and your producers can interact and can produce and consume value on your ecosystem. And I'll share with you one quick example on this. Intel in the 90s. So Intel is very known at the time for Moore's Law, right? So they would just churn out more powerful microprocessors. But they realized at some point, well, we can make as many great and as powerful microprocessor as we want. If the rest of the industry is not following with their own innovation, it doesn't really matter. More power doesn't serve anyone. So they realized, now if you look at their perspective from their own business model, they had the technology, they had the organizational prowess, but they were stuck there in terms of growth. And they had 80% of the market share. So they realized, well, we have to go out to the ecosystem, right? And what is the ecosystem for them? Well, it was the motherboard. The motherboard was the ecosystem of the PC industry at the time, still is in a significant way. And inside the motherboard, you have all of these different players, economic actors with their own business model. And what was not working is that they were not connected with one another. So Intel took the initiative to bring a new piece of infrastructure into the motherboard, PCI bus. So I'm not a technical person myself, but PCI bus is basically what connects the microprocessor, the power, with all of the other components of the motherboard. And so in doing that, accelerated data transfer offered more power and more possibility to the whole industry. And all of a sudden people realize, oh my God, we can do other things with a computer, and it kind of boosted the whole wave of creativity. So they kind of went from this business mission of selling processors to, let's say, at least a collective purpose of architecting the entire PC industry. And they had to make this move of taking a larger responsibility. And the last element is what I call communal functions. So these are all the things that you would expect your government in your city to take care of. And it's often for an ecosystem leader, it's understanding that you don't just look after yourself, but that the success of others in joining the ecosystem and in thriving in the ecosystem is just as important. And so if you want to be the ecosystem leader, you have to sometimes help other players, other economic actors succeed. And some of the things that are happening in that direction is, for example, Intel, so build this infrastructure, but then they also had to inspire the industry about what can you do with a computer. So they built a lab, and they did a whole thing around what is the future of video conferencing at the time, right? It was just nascent, connected kitchen, etc. Upskilling is another strategy. So Taobao created a micro entrepreneur university to help anyone who wants to run a business be successful. Tesla, shared their patents for free with the rest of the competitors to enable the entire space to grow, the entire electric car industry to grow. And Amazon, for example, with the Kindle, is known to have foregone their own share of profit to bring the publishers who were a bit reluctant, who had a lot to lose in this ebook game. So the mayors, they kind of weave these new relationships with these different components, but always with an eye of ensuring that the whole is thriving, and that's the key. That's the difference. And just one more slide on this, Stuart, because I've talked about ecosystem leaders as mayors, as you either have to be Jack Ma or Elon Musk, but I think there is a lot more granularity to the picture. So yes, you can have your own game, you can develop your own proprietary infrastructure, communal functions, etc. You also see examples, early 20th century car industry was more like that, where all of these things are not owned by the ecosystem leaders, but they are public goods. So building of the Lincoln Highway was one such example. And then you also have things that are in between. So the Roche pharma company, they have this ecosystem game around personalized healthcare. And in Canada, Canada would never allow any pharma company to own patient data, right? So what they've done instead is create a not-for-profit organization where Roche is on the board of it, along with other pharma, along with research, not-for-profit, and government organizations, to rule over how do you collect data and how can you all these players use data. And that's a way to unlock a piece of the ecosystem that needs to happen, but that needs to happen in a legitimate way. So mayor can be a leader, can also be a group of people or a collective function.
Yeah, it's really, really interesting, Greg. The societal purpose. If you go back to that, what is the point of corporations then? Remember, I think it was in the 1960s, who said what's good for General Motors is good for America, and we're kind of getting back to that, aren't we? Because I think there's a question from Cecile says, how would you measure a KPI like how many jobs you created? Because presumably the job creation is not only in the company, it's outside the company as well. So
yeah,
I think we're only just starting to figure this out. So what is the point of corporations within society, and how is this different from how they've behaved and perceived the world in the past?
Yeah.
Is that a big enough question for you, Greg?
A big enough question, yeah, for the next few minutes we have. Yeah, so, well, I also see that this construct that we call business is going to keep evolving in the future. And so now, whether you look at it from, we have all these pressures from the environment, from people, from society, right? There's so much more transparency and therefore so much more pressure. A CEO cannot ignore these. That's kind of pushing the role of business to change and to get closer to society, I think, But of course, that's kind of the reactionary way. And I think throughout time, the business leaders that have created, things that have revolutionized, that we all admire, revolutionize our, not only business, but our ways of life, which is the point of business at the end of the day. Always had this sense that business is not just about business. There's no such thing, so to speak. But business is here as a very efficient vehicle to create value for people. And so I believe whether it's a risk thing, whether it's I'm being dragged along this new paradigm, so to speak, or I have my own sense of what value should be created in society, I believe that there is kind of this direction where the role of business is becoming larger and therefore more towards a societal framing.
Yeah, Dean Miles asks a question, which is a kind of common one with ecosystems. How can we monitor and ensure ethical practices throughout the ecosystem? Because by their very nature, I suppose your element of trust is where you come down to on that. But what's your response on that?
Yeah. Monitor is a hard one. I mean, my first inclination would be that there is a kind of a leadership responsibility of doing as the right thing, so to speak. And you will see, now that we have this frame of ecosystem, there'll be good and bad ecosystem, right? There'll be manipulative, exploitative ecosystem, and there will be generative, positive ecosystem as well. So I think where it starts is from the leadership, from the organization. What is it that we want to create? And then, of course, for this, in this larger question, I think there's going to be a question around how do we regulate, how do we monitor? It's kind of like in a village, I think it's the same answer as in a city. You have a balance of power between the different institutions of society. So the role of media, the role of government, and the legal system will have to play a role as well.
Anastasia from Greece has a point which I think is really valid. If you're in a culture where ecosystems aren't really thought of, you're in an organization that's set in the old ways of behavior, how do you change things? How do you set about moving your company along the route of ecosystem? I mean, you've pointed to inspirational companies and inspirational individuals, but the reality is that most people aren't in brilliantly innovative organizations surrounded by awareness of ecosystems. So where do you start?
Yeah, I think you can take it from also a business case angle and I think this is also the case for many ecosystem leaders, that they're saying we have an opportunity here to grow, or we're stuck and we need to find new ways of growing. And the only way we're going to grow is if the system shifts as well, right? And so therefore you have to start paying attention to what the ecosystem is and taking this leadership role of convincing that there is another game that the whole sector can play. And if you're well positioned yourself, then you're going to benefit from it. So I think this idea of changing the ecosystem in order to unlock a new possibility, a new business model for yourself, is a maybe more logical, less societal aware way of telling the story that will resonate with at least an additional chunk of these leaders.
Before Greg shows his final slides, a couple of things. Somebody from LinkedIn says this way of thinking is the new way, and I agree with that. And someone else from LinkedIn says leadership in an ecosystem is not about exerting hierarchical control, but rather about influencing and guiding through collaboration, inspiration, and trust building. It is a collective effort that requires active engagement and participation from all the ecosystem members to foster sustainable growth and success. I think Greg might have written that himself.
Yeah, well, you see, it's an anonymous post, so it might very well be. Yeah, thank you for the comment.
Yeah, but I thought that I read it out because that was a really good summary of some of the things you've been talking about.
Absolutely.
Do you want to show your final slides, Greg?
Yes. Okay, so I want to take this a little bit further, and this is where we go in the space of hey, if we're serious about this, like I said, there's going to be good and bad ecosystems. So how do we build good ecosystems? And so the thing is with this, so now we have a new frame, right? We have this ecosystem model, so to speak, or lens. We understand that it's a wider lens and it's great, etc. But we also have a tendency when we look at these pictures, it's a model, it's an abstraction, we see their parts. And when we look at parts, especially in our Western mindset, we think, oh yeah, it's easy. We're gonna, it's a puzzle. I have to put the parts together and everything's gonna go well. But that's where, and we've heard this from, especially in the leadership space, that's very prevalent, right? This idea that we can't just operate our businesses in this kind of complex environment with a linear mindset, right? An ecosystem is not a machine. And if you try to abstract the hell out of an ecosystem, you're gonna lose the juice. You're gonna lose also the X factor of why they're really working well. And so I think we have to make this move away from just trying to explain things and trying to get into, here are the 5 steps you need to do in order to build a fantastic ecosystem, to a sense of relating. Relating is more what, let's say, artists do, right? So maybe it's a mindset change from an engineer to an artist. An artist has another sense, another way of relating to their object. And so if I go to the world of arts to find inspiration, to get a little bit more away from business, to find inspiration about how to run ecosystem, I was in a conference one with this gentleman, Stefan Sagmeister. He did a test on us. So I want to do the test. Maybe people in the chat can participate as well. So he showed us 2 Mondrians. You know Mondrian, the painter, Dutch painter, who's famous for this kind of paintings. And he said to us, there is one original painting here and one fake painting. So, and there's no trick. It's just about guessing which one is which. So in the chat, maybe you can say, if you think A is the original, you put an A. If you think B is the original, put a B in the chat. Let's see if we have a little time for this. Stuart, you're welcome to take a guess, but I'm not going to put you on the spot.
Feel free to put me on the spot.
Let's see if people have time to play the game. B, Crystal says, okay. Augustin says B. B. All right. Okay. So what is the answer? The answer is B. And in Sagmeister's experience, 90% of the people that he tests this with answer B. Yes, they recognize the original. And he says to us, it's because we have a sense of beauty that we recognize, right? So we have a sense that And beauty not in the sense of preferences or taste, but beauty more, you could also call it wholeness, elegance, order, harmony. We recognize it because it makes us feel right. It makes us feel good, right? And so Mondrian didn't try to just align squares and lines together in a perfect way, right? What he did was to iterate as many times as possible until he got to a sense of beauty. And so, if you will, beauty is the organizing principle of the whole, the organizing principle that organizes the parts in a coherent whole that delivers on its highest potential. And you can see this in the same way in every great works of humanity that I know of: architecture, music, even sports, even leadership, right? You have people who are working with a sense of relating to the whole, seem to be guided along the way and more creative about how the different parts are gonna come together. And so in the ecosystem is by definition a complex animal, right? So it's not your complicated world, it's a complex world, it's in the life system. And therefore you can't just apply this linear mindset to it, but you apply the approach like an artist of relating to the whole. If you do that, then you're also going to have an easier way of understanding what is the potential of this ecosystem. What is the meaning of this ecosystem? What wants to be expressed? What wants to be healed? What wants to thrive here? And to unlock meaning that you would not otherwise be able to unlock, because people all of a sudden see, if you're approaching it that way, then you're starting to see a little bit under the surface of what really matters to the people that you're trying to serve or the cause that you're trying to serve. And so I'll go back to my original example of Taobao, because I think that they had something like that going on, right? It's always tricky to find a great business that covers all of, that does everything right. But I think Taobao is a case where they had a sense of, hey, we're trying to do something that's different here. And it was an ecosystem, as I said at the beginning, in terms of its organization. It's also an ecosystem in terms of the impact that it had. So 16 million new jobs in the space of time that I showed you earlier, 2003 to 2008. It changed also the culture of commerce in China in 2003. Lots of suspicion, lots of bribes, fake goods, etc. Here on the platform, all of a sudden, because of this review system, you had a whole other game going. Language changed. People called each other dear seller, dear buyer. They pooled resources together when a vegetable seller had a flood, and so on and so forth. So you have anecdotes like that show that the culture changed. They put rural China on the map, integrating them into the modern economy. So all of a sudden, all of these people who were trying to go out to the city to find a job, they could actually stay back and open their business or be employed by someone else. And so they really did this thing that lifted the whole world of commerce upwards, I would say. And Jack Ma has this quote that I really love, because it hints at the fact that it wasn't just impact for impact, but it was kind of releasing in society or in the economy a new momentum, a new engine, you could say. So we're not an e-commerce company, we're helping build e-commerce companies. So it's kind of lifting the whole game so that you have all of this new wave of value creation that can happen. And so if you think about this story, it's really a story of empowerment. People finding independence, entrepreneurship, in many cases expressing their creativity as well. And you compare to the story of e-commerce in the West. And to me, the story of e-commerce in the West is one where you had a functioning economy, you put a digital layer on top of it. What you get is a lot of cheaper prices, efficiency, faster delivery times, convenience. And so it's more of a story of efficiency for me. And likewise, in the West, we've been, kind of enamored, we've fallen in love with the idea of disruption. And disruption is interesting if you are the person, if you're the organization who disrupts. It's not so nice if you're the disruptee. And also from a societal point of view, it's not very clear. You're kind of breaking things open, which is great because things are stuck. You need to bring that energy of kind of breaking things, but you also need to accompany it to a different place. And I think that's what the example of Taobao shows us. And I like to call this example an example of upruption, right? So the difference I make here is that disruption is a game of changing value around from one set of actor to another, whereas upruption is about lifting the whole game up. You're building a new equilibrium. Most, if not all of the actors are getting value out of it. And you're really changing a behavior towards a higher expression of what it is that you're trying to solve in society. So quick summary, just to wrap up here, one slide. So we've kind of seen this move from going from business model to ecosystem. So the idea of playing a bigger game, embracing a bigger game, embracing also a new leadership posture, going from the CEO to a mayor mindset, a mayor who leads the collective, not just themselves. And then this business of leaving away disruption and embracing upruption with the sense of lifting the whole game and everyone up in the process. So I'll leave us here, Stuart.
Brilliant, Greg. Really like that. Do you think different cultures, kind of national cultures, have a greater propensity to understand and practice ecosystems? It always strikes me like the Asian cultures are much more comfortable with ambiguity, for instance.
Yeah, exactly. I think it's not a random that my own experience and inspiration came from China. There's a sense of fluidity, like you say. It can be a difficult space for if you're not used to it, but people have their hands in many different things. It's also the metaphor that comes from me is Chinese medicine, right? Versus Western medicine. Western medicine is very good at pinpointing what's wrong in one specific organ, etc., which is all good. But Chinese medicine looks at you as a whole person, not even just the body, but the whole person that you are. So I do think Asians are but I think there is a similarity between this culture and what is being said and taught at the forefront of leadership practice. For example, I see the exact same principles being we arrive at the same kind of view, I think.
There's lots of comments coming through. Simbarashi says, I love the idea of upruption. Should be the title of a book, really, Greg.
Maybe.
And I think the idea, the beauty idea is really interesting. We've had a few conversations recently about the ability to be able to think, to philosophize, to embrace beauty as being really important within organizations. And in this age of AI, the essential humanity of philosophy, art, etc., is becoming more and more important. And what you're saying is much the same, really, from explaining to relating.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I'm glad you take the AI example. I think this is another way we're being pushed, right, as human beings. So if this thing now is becoming more intelligent than us on one kind of spectrum, one dimension of intelligence, then we better embrace the other dimensions of intelligence. I would say even the more creative intelligence that we have access to, but that we haven't really trained so well. So yeah, it's another angle.
Yeah, Augustine says beauty is encoded wisdom, which is a very, very nice phrase, and thank you very much for that. We're out of time, Greg, unfortunately. If people want to find out more about your work, how can they find it? Apart from buying your books, obviously, which I'm sure they've all done.
Yeah, so they can actually go to upruption.com because it's an idea that I feel is kind of encapsulating all of what I've shared today. And so, yeah, they can find me there, upruption.com.
Greg Bernarda, thank you very much. That was a brilliant session, really interesting ideas about the realities of ecosystems and the potential for ecosystems to make the world a better place, I think, is what I'm taking away from it. Our next webinar will be on June the 29th, when we'll be talking about workforce ecosystems with Elizabeth Altman and David Kieron. Thank you, everyone who's joined us live from throughout the world. We look forward to seeing you again soon. And thank you very much to Greg Bernarda.
Thank you.